Welcome back. This is part 2 on the lecture Concept of Design for Unit 10. So when we last left off, we were comparing modernist way of thinking about design versus Baroque way of thinking about composition. And so I think the kind of the reductive and economical approach of modernism, the search for essentialism, making things as pared down as possible, is probably the biggest way of thinking about the difference in composition. But there's many things that are also similar. Both of these are thinking about grid structures. Both of these are thinking about diagonals, right? Diagonals that run across. But the Baroque is all the way they think about those things is different. They play off of those things as well as use them, whereas in the modernist approach is very much locked into the grid and locked into the diagonals. So this kind of gets back in some ways to my first point, but I want to talk a little bit about perceptual psychology because it was a major part of this push. One of the reasons why early modernist artists and designers were thinking about design as a very real thing that could be studied scientifically is in part because of the developments that were going on in perceptual psychology. And here's this image right here is a really good example of something that will show you what I mean. If you look at this image, it's very hard not to look at it without seeing some of these horizontals as being bending. But every single one of these horizontals is perfectly straight, perfectly horizontal. Not a single one's on a diagonal, not a single one has any curve to it. But the presence of the black and the white shapes keeps pushing them, shifting them. And one of the things you'll notice is if your eye focuses on one section, you can kind of straighten out the lines in that one section, like if you focus right here at the edge. But then in the periphery vision, it looks like the other parts are bending or even moving, bending and twisting and on diagonals. Here's another example of an illusion that and I don't like the term illusion because they're not so much illusions as they are proofs of what's really going on with our eyes and with our brain. So they're more like realities, but we tend to call them illusions. Here's another example of that, of a Gestalt illusion, a demonstration of a basic perceptual principle, which is that we tend to see the whole even when the whole is not there, right? In this case, we all see the box. Even though the box does not exist, we all see this kind of cubic box. And another thing that's interesting about these kind of illusions is that they can flip based on how you trick your brain to look at it, right? You can look at this and you can see, right, oh, there's a box that's floating in front of these circles that are also kind of just floating in the air. But if you trick your brain to think, no, wait, that's not what I'm looking at. What I'm looking at is a series of holes. And the white box made out of bars is behind this white plane with these holes. I'm looking through these holes to this black space where the white box exists. And if you convince yourself that that's what you're seeing, it'll flip and you will see the box as being behind the white sheet. Neither the white sheet nor the box actually exist, right? It's just how you train your brain to see it. You can also, if you really are good, you can train your brain to really examine just each individual circle and really train yourself to ignore the fact of the existence of the box, that it isn't really there, because after all, it isn't really there. Here's some other kind of basic illusions. Some of them have to do with the relative measuring of things. Human eye is very bad at measuring things when they're in different contexts. So this length right here and this length right there are both exactly the same distance. They're the exact same width, but they don't look at all the same. They look very different because of the presence of the other lines around them. This one looks obviously much longer. Or here's a very simple one, right? ABC, 12, 13, 14. The middle figure looks like a 13 when you read it one way, looks like a B when you read it the other way. This is actually the same illusion, just done a little bit more simply than the very first illusion I showed, right? The way these lines want to look like they're shifting on a diagonal, but they're not. They're all perfectly straight horizontals. Here's another scale perception illusion. this circle and these kind of spherical forms, right, are the exact same size. This one looks smaller because it's being surrounded by these much larger scale forms. This one looks bigger because it's surrounded by these smaller forms. This is a different type of illusion, or a flipping of perception. This length and that length are the same. They don't look the same because of the presence of this perspective system. So, from that, what can we take? The basic idea, like I said, to begin with, is that design is real. These things actually do happen. But at the same time, in the 20th century, even as they were really kind of dealing with that fact, dealing with the things that perceptual psychologists were learning about human ability to perceive things and to see things, they were in a way also creating a new way of thinking about design, a new culture, a new cultural idea about design, and that was going to lead to new types of artwork, both new types of graphic design and types of industrial design, but also new types of studio artwork. And so for the rest of the lecture, I just want to talk a little bit about some of the other ways of thinking about looking at artwork. And for this first set, and so each one is set in, as a pairing. This first set primarily wants you to think about the idea of unity versus variety, and how different ways that artists solve that problem of creating unity. Unity can be defined as the sense of how a whole work of art feels like it all goes together. And so one way that artists, especially in the 20th century, create unity is through economy, is through reducing, simplifying things. But another way is through creating pairings or organizations, and having things refer to each other. So in this case, Rauschenberg has created kind of a, or no, this is not a Rauschenberg, this is a Jasper Johns, created a very obvious kind of problem of variety and contrast, which is that he's made a painting that then has a three-dimensional element added to it, and the three-dimensional element is always, going to have it's always going to fight with the two-dimensional idea of a painting. And what are the ways that he solves it? Well, one of the ways is by that both everything is based on symmetries. Here we have like a radial type symmetry, and then the faces here at the top are symmetrically organized, and also on a grid structure, and everything is very carefully geometrically organized. We also have the repetition of 4 stripes and 4 faces. So there's that kind of similarity in terms of organization, similarity in terms of structure. Another concept, this is probably a good place for us to end this part, we'll get to economy,